You're now listening to the Laravel Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Laravel Podcast Season 6. I'm your co-host, Matt Stauffer, and I got Taylor with me. You want to say hi to the folks?
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
So, as we have shown you, we're going to be doing for this episode or for the season. With every episode, we're going to give you kind of an update of what's going on in the world of Laravel, and then kind of talk about any topics that are really relevant to us. So, this one is completely separate from anything that's going on in the world of Laravel. But I just wanted to hype that Screencasting.com just kind of pushed out their first or only, I'm not sure, video, and that's Aaron Francis, a Laracon speaker, who's been doing a lot of great screencasts lately, and I bought and consumed a pretty decent amount of it, and it's got a lot of the nuggets that I've learned painfully over the years in ScreenFlow and doing this kind of stuff, and so I was really grateful. Taylor, do you do a lot of video editing?
I have in the past. I haven't done as much lately, but back in the old days when Laravel first came out, I used to actually make those little screencasts pretty often, actually, just showing off the little Laravel features, and I would use ScreenFlow for that. I haven't done it in a while, but Aaron, we actually do have him cooking up something for Laravel Nova right now, just kind of on the side, a little intro video screencast type thing for Laravel Nova that we're going to put on a sort of a revamped marketing site for that. So
that's awesome.
I'm curious to see what he comes up with.
Yeah, I remember you used to make those videos, but I never knew if you edited them or if you kind of paid somebody else to do the editing. Okay, so you know this world.
I edited them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I've made lots of YouTube videos in the past, but right now today I'm editing the last video of a course I'm about to do, and it's my first time ever doing a course, and I've realized that a course has like a whole new set of responsibilities in editing that just popping out a video on YouTube is not quite the same. So it's been fun kind of like as I'm finishing up editing, seeing his course where he talks about the recording of his course through that process. So check out, if you're interested in doing screencasts, if you're interested in doing YouTube or whatever else, check out screencasting.com. Friend of the pod, Aaron Francis, longtime Laravel community member and Laracon speaker. All right, so let's talk about new things that are happening in the world of Laravel. So one of the things we have on our list here is talking about the Livewire version of Breeze. And I don't know, in writing my book and talking about like the various stacks that you can choose for the various Laravel tools, I don't think everyone even fully understands that there are these stacks and the list of stacks available for each of them aren't the same. So could you talk a little bit about how Breeze and Jetstream have the different stacks and kind of what they have optional right now and what this introduction means?
Yeah, so Jetstream and Breeze being Laravel's two main starter kits, and the main difference between them is Jetstream is sort of has more features. It's a little bit more stuff out of the box, like team management, two-factor authentication, some other stuff. Breeze, a little bit more streamlined, kind of like the old school make auth command if you've been around Laravel for a while. Basically it's the spiritual successor to make auth, you might say. And they have different stacks. So basically they have either inertia, or which lets you use Vue or React, or they have Livewire, which lets you use Blade. And in Breeze's case, it also has just a plain Blade stack with no other additional things on top. Yep. And the reason for that is sort of, to give you some history, I didn't want Laravel to be sort of very dogmatic about one particular way of doing front end. And I think this is a little bit different than something like Ruby on Rails, which has sort of been in the Twitter space lately with the whole TypeScript drama, where David, the maintainer on Rails, I think is very much JavaScript in moderation, you might say. And I didn't really want to take any hard stance either way because I actually personally really like Vue. I enjoy React as well, but I think Livewire is also awesome, and I wanted everyone to sort of be able to choose their flavor. So yeah, Breeze comes with a few different stacks. It's historically had just plain Blade, inertia paired with Vue, or inertia paired with React. And now this week we launched Blade paired with Livewire, which sort of just supercharges Blade and lets you build modern reactive feeling applications without actually writing much JavaScript at all, which is really cool.
Yeah. And Jetstream, I don't know if you remember off the top of your head, but I remember when I was writing the book, the latest version of the book, I was noticing that the list of stacks available to Jetstream and Breeze aren't the same, primarily because Jetstream requires reactivity, whereas Breeze doesn't, right?
Basically, yeah. So Jetstream has either Livewire or inertia and Vue. There's actually no inertia React stack. And Partly because it's just a lot. Jetstream has a lot of stuff, and it's a lot to maintain all these different stacks. And when you add another permutation onto the list of stacks, it actually greatly balloons up how many things we need to maintain. So it's a lot easier to add a new stack to Breeze because it's only 6 or 7 pages, maybe.
Yes.
So it's pretty doable.
Yeah, and that was what I wanted to point out is that Jetstream, each of these stacks is a huge amount of code. It's a huge amount of templates. It's a huge amount of reactivity code and everything like that. Whereas Breeze is, I mean, if those who aren't familiar, the old make-auth, it's, login, sign up, password reset, email authentication, I think. There's just a lot less going on there that you have to code. And also that ends up being the reason why there was a classic Blade stack with Breeze, where there was never a classic Blade stack with Jetstream. And as I was talking to folks about it, I just realized that wasn't always something that people are super familiar with. So I just wanted to cover that real quick. So we got a Livewire Breeze now. So that's fantastic.
Yes.
So I know that I've been talking to people about prompts, and not everybody actually knows about prompts. So before we talk about the new feature we have in prompts, could you just kind of give a quick intro to what prompts is if people haven't seen the intro videos?
Yeah. So back a few, I don't remember how long ago, several months ago, me and Jess were talking about how these CLI libraries in like the Node ecosystem just looked awesome. Like they had awesome text prompts, awesome spinners, cool loading indicators, progress bars, and they just looked so much better and more modern than anything we had in PHP.
Yeah. And
so the goal was sort of to bring that kind of CLI experience into PHP, if it was even possible. I mean, we thought surely it must be possible because you can do anything you want to, I guess. But anyway, Jess was the one that really like cracked how to do all that. And to be honest, like I have very little idea how it works.
Love it.
But basically it's a composer package you can pull in actually to any PHP application, not just a Laravel application. And it basically gives you 7 or 8 namespaced functions like text, spin, progress, table, different things like that. And it just looks awesome. All the prompts look really modern. There's validation. There's searching capabilities that does like little drop downs in the console and lets you select your search results. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's the type of stuff where I don't spend as much time in the Node ecosystem anymore. And so I was seeing her demo and being like, oh, there's a lot you can do here, because having written kind of stuff to output to the CLI, I don't even understand the concept of how you can have stuff that changes while it's still in the same spot in the screen in the CLI. Like didn't know you could do that. So
yeah.
So you said that there's a new feature here called multi-search. Can you talk to us about it a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. So we have had a search function since prompts came out, which basically it brings up a text box, and as you start typing, it sort of drops down a little box that is filtering as you go. So, but behind the scenes, you could be hitting like a database. So as you're typing a user email address, the list of users is filtering as you type, and it's querying the database on the back end, and it's just like a little search drop down, like you might see on the web, really. But it only let you select one option. So we just shipped multi-search, which lets you filter down your search results, arrow down with your keys, and then hit like space bar to select multiple things you want to select, and it gives you back an array of the selected options. So a pretty cool little feature. And with that, I forgot to mention, we shipped progress bar this week as well. So
nice.
As you would expect, you call a progress function, you pass it a callback, it increments the progress bar. But it just looks really good doing it, and you can adjust the labels as it goes and show percentages and all of that stuff.
That's awesome. And I've been living in Valet a lot lately, which is not built on Laravel, and it kind of makes me wonder, can I pull prompts in and do some fun stuff there? So I think might be digging into that when we get off this. Awesome.
Yeah.
So another thing that's been talked about a little bit on the Twitter sphere is Pail. Can you talk to us a little bit about Pail?
So I think it goes back to a tweet maybe last week that Jeffrey Way made of Laracast fame. And he said something about, I feel like there should be a tail command in Laravel. And then I responded and said there actually did used to be a tail command in Laravel. And it was like in Laravel 4 or 5, where basically you could run artisan tail, and it would, just tail your log file for your application. And I can't remember if it would work remotely or whatever, but anyway, it would tail your log file. So Nuno thought that was just like really a cool idea. And he loves building CLI type tools. He likes building pretty CLI outputs. Yeah. He is kind of behind the renovations of Artisan Serve and all of the new output for the CLI in general in Laravel. Yeah. So he started working on this package called Pail, sort of as his own little experiment, just to gather some community feedback. And it basically, it works a little bit different than the old Artisan Tail command. So what it does is when you run Artisan Pail, it actually hooks into kind of the report function of the logging and exception handler, so that even if you're not using log files, like imagine you were sending all of your exceptions to Sentry and you're actually not logging them at all, the old tail command wouldn't really help you in that case because it was actually reading just the log file, files, the text file. Whereas this kind of hooks into the report function, so everything that goes through report, which typically is everything that you're sending either locally or to some external service, you see right there on your CLI output. And of course, it's all prettified and color-coded and has nice stack traces and everything. And he also added filtering capabilities so that you can like filter on a given string or even a given authenticated user, like -- user equals 1, and you get all of the, or only the, the exceptions that user is seeing. Yeah. So actually pretty nice, I think, for simple use cases, just to be able to tail something for a specific user. If you're trying to diagnose something in production, which is something we do fairly often, like we may need to impersonate a certain user, kind of click around and see what is actually going on, and we can tail or pail that output right there. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's a pretty simple package. I think we'll probably just ship that out pretty soon.
Okay. Yeah, I really liked seeing the filtering aspect of it, because one of the things I've done often with logs is try to get information out of it that I did not send, and it's often user-related information, and I'm like, oh crap, I need to now like embed it in there. So yeah, the ability to say for this user, for this particular string or whatever, and actually get kind of the real-time trailing reports as well is really, really, really cool. I'm excited to play around with it.
Nice.
Okay, so moving on from announcements a little bit, we still got a little bit of announcement stuff going on here. We had a couple questions that had come in around hosting, and I know that there's been some hosting changes. So I said I wanted to kind of address those questions first and have a conversation around how to host Laravel, and then move in from there to kind of what's been going on with Forge and Envoyer. So the biggest question that we had from several people is, what are the actual options for just deploying a Laravel app to the internet today? And I know we kind of talked a little bit beforehand about what the various options, so I'll let you kind of run with it, and I'll chip in as possible. But like, if you were to say, here are the options for hosting a Laravel app today, kind of what are the main, maybe not the actual companies, but just kind of the main categories of hosting option that we actually have available to us?
So as far as I know, there's probably still the old option of having a server that you FTP files into, any virtual private server. I guess that's still a thing, like GoDaddy or DreamHost or whatever. So of course you could always just get a server that has PHP installed and upload the files that way. That'd be the most old school way to do it.
Yeah, just a shared host.
Our options internally at Laravel are Forge or Vapor. Forge is a tool that links to like your DigitalOcean, your AWS account, a place where you can spin up virtual private servers. It installs everything for you. It links to your GitHub, and then when you push, it deploys out to Forge. Or deploys out to your server using Forge. Vapor is a serverless solution built on AWS Lambda, where it packages up all your code, ships it to Lambda, it provisions everything you need on AWS once you link your account, and you don't really need to think about the underlying servers as far as like picking, how many servers you need, load balancing traffic across them, doing backups, doing operating system updates. You don't really need to think about any of that. So those are the two options we have internally, and I'm sure there's some other third-party options. I think you can still do Laravel on Heroku. You can ship Laravel on Fly.io. So those are the main options I'm familiar with. I'm not sure if there's anything else out there.
I see a little bit more of the world than you do, unfortunately, because I see some nasty stuff there. But yeah, like most of what we see is self-hosted. So there's a ton of companies that just run their own hardware, whether it's in the cloud or something they have locally. But it's basically they completely spun up the infrastructure, and they are, like you said, they're doing whatever their deploy system. And sometimes it's somebody's SSH is in and they get pull, and sometimes it's actually FTP or whatever. You've got the shared hosting, which is the old school like DreamHost and Blue, whatever that one was that we all used for a while, and a couple of those. And so shared hosting, the upside is it's super, super cheap. You pay $10 a month and you have basically unlimited sites. The downside is, there's a million downsides, but one of them is you don't have your own box. You're sharing with other people, and if somebody else is a bad actor who's on the same box with you, then your site's just going to slow down. And at some point, they're going to say there's no way to keep the site from slowing down other than paying for your own box. At which point, you're moving up to the next one, which is VPS, Virtual Private Server, where you basically have like your own. It's not actually a full server, but it's much more segmented than shared hosting is. And that's things like DigitalOcean and Linode and AWS EC2, and that's what Forge lives on top of, right? Forge is a tool for managing your own VPS, but you could do your own VPS yourself if you wanted. Then you've got true serverless, which we were talking about earlier. Like Lambda is like AWS Lambda and Vapor on top of it are like what people think of when they talk about serverless. But then you made a point, we were talking earlier, that there's also other things where they effectively manage it for you even though it's not on top of Lambda, and that's things like Heroku and Fly.io and stuff. And I don't know if people traditionally call them serverless, but there's definitely this like, things spin up and down. And I think maybe the difference between serverless and Heroku is more like a managed VPS maybe. So I guess you've got like VPS
right,
where you have one box, and then you got managed VPS where you don't even really think about the boxes you have. You just, like Heroku calls them dynos, but it's sort of like you just upload the stuff and you can just drag a little slider to make it more or less powerful.
Yeah, you still have to manually kind of scale up your dynos.
Yes. And then you've got like the most further kind of thing, which is serverless, where it's purely just like, hey, throw whatever you want at the server, and it's just going to scale up and down and charge you accordingly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anything else has really changed there in terms of hosting. I think those have all been, serverless is probably the newest addition. If like the managed VPS, shared hosting, self-hosting, those have all been around for ages. It does feel like serverless is more relatively new, and, Vapor on top of AWS is certainly the place I would go if I was doing something. Although Chris Fidel works at Fly.io, so it's been kind of coming up in my feed a lot more. I don't know a ton about it, but it definitely is interesting to me. But all this kind of leads a little bit into one of the conversations that you had about a new feature, which is the ways that Forge and Envoyer have been kind of touching each other a little bit. Now, Envoyer isn't technically a hosting platform. You can hook it into an existing VPS. But I know that not everyone has a full understanding of what Envoyer does and the value. So could you start by giving like an intro to Envoyer and then also kind of tell us about this new feature?
Yeah. So I wrote Forge in 2014 and then quickly followed up with Envoyer in 2015, and Forge still to this day doesn't really have like zero downtime deployments built in, where the traditional way of doing zero downtime deployments in PHP is by putting the new code in a new folder and then symlinking your like currently served web directory to that new folder in one atomic operation. And that's what Envoyer does. So you tell it your server information, like the IP address, where your code's located on GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket. It sets up all the symlinking, all the folders, and it pulls down the fresh code, does the symlinking, runs your deployment hooks, runs your migrations if you want, all of that stuff. So it's more like a code deployment platform, not really a hosting platform. But Forge and Envoyer pair really well together because you can build your servers on Forge, and then you can use Envoyer to do the zero downtime deployment if you need it. So a lot of people actually just don't care. Like, just run my deployment script from Forge. I don't care if there's 2 milliseconds of downtime while the Git pull runs, or something goes wrong, because we just don't have enough traffic to care about that or whatever.
Yeah.
But a lot of people want to do zero downtime deployment if they have a lot of traffic, or it's, they have customers on the website. But historically, it was like Forge and Envoyer had no idea about each other at all, which felt really weird because they're both built by Laravel. Yeah. And to give you some background, when I first wrote Envoyer, I was trying to do sort of this like favor for the whole PHP ecosystem, where there was sort of some criticism of Laravel, like, hey, Laravel doesn't really like, they're kind of all about Laravel. They don't really contribute back to the PHP ecosystem. And Envoyer was sort of a concession to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a concession to that argument of like, hey, we actually do care about the wider PHP ecosystem. Here's this tool that any framework can use, or any host can use, not just Forge. We didn't even put it on a Laravel domain. It's envoyer.io, unlike all of the other Laravel products. So anyway, historically, Forge and Envoyer didn't really know about each other, and that just started to feel really silly. So a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, we launched a new feature in Forge where you can say, hey, I'm using Envoyer to deploy this site. And Forge lets you link in your Envoyer API token, and the Forge UI sort of more intelligently reacts to the fact that this is an Envoyer project. Like if you go to the environment variable tab, it tells you, hey, you actually need to manage this over on Envoyer, and links you over to the page. And the deploy tab, it says deploy with Envoyer, and you click the button, and that actually triggers an Envoyer deployment from Forge. So it all feels much more integrated.
Yeah.
So what we launched today that's actually new is the ability to link an existing site to Envoyer. So previously, a month ago when we launched that integration, you could only do that for new sites on Forge, a new site that we are configuring fresh.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of Envoyer sites already on Forge, probably over 1,000, I'm sure. Yeah. So you can link those existing sites to Envoyer, and how that works is basically you go into Forge to that existing site, there's an Envoyer tab. Forge will see that, hey, this site is using current/public as its web directory, which is typically what Envoyer would use for its web directory. And it's like, hey, it looks like you might be using Envoyer, are you? And you can say yes and select the Envoyer project from a dropdown that site is linked to. And then Forge just kind of knows about Envoyer at that point, and everything works well, and you can deploy with Envoyer from Forge, and yada, yada, yada. So anyway, that was sort of a collaboration between James Brooks and Joe here at Laravel, and I'm really happy with how that turned out, and I honestly feel really silly that we didn't do it years ago. But anyway, it is here now, and I think it's a pretty big upgrade.
I love that. And as someone who uses Envoyer pretty frequently, I'm really happy to hear that. What our flow would often be is, we still want to use Forge to spin up the site in the server. So we'd use Forge, spin up the site in the server, and then I'd go to like the domain, and it's like, all right, do you want to add the code or whatever? And I'm like, oh no, I remember now when I'm using Envoyer, this is where I just let it just sit there in this awkward intermediate stage.
Very weird, awkward state. Yeah.
And then I go over to Envoyer and I set it up, and it has no knowledge of Forge. And so then I'm doing things in Envoyer, and I get why it was there. And I was just like, yeah, this is just kind of like the nature of the thing. But now that you're naming it, I'm like, yeah, that's a very non-Laravel-y way to experience it. So knowing now I can just do it, because I think of some of the steps of setup that had to happen in Envoyer as being more like a Forgey thing. And so now you're telling me I can do those as Forge. I'm like, great, I love this. So
I think what's cool is when you configure a new Forge site that's going to use Envoyer, it actually uses the Envoyer API to add the server to the Envoyer project, to add the SSH key back onto Forge to make sure the connection is good. Like,
that's great.
All of those steps that were so manual now is all automated, which is good.
That's so great. Love an API token that you can just do that kind of stuff with.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we had one last topic for the day, which is we keep getting this same question over the years of podcasting, and also I'm sure you get this on Twitter. So I just wanted us to cover it, which is people keep asking about what your experience of working with pull requests to the framework is like. And we've got things like, what's your process of working with pull requests, and why did you merge somebody else's pull request when you didn't merge mine doing the same thing? And are there things that have been PR'd multiple times that you didn't feel great about? You would merge if it was great, or things you regret merging. So just in general, like, people are really kind of asking about that. So could we lead with just what is your general thought process and approach when a third-party PR comes into Laravel?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I pretty much start every morning by looking at PRs across the whole Laravel organization, because I'm really the only one that merges PRs across the whole organization and sort of has the final say into what is merged or not. And we keep that number pretty low. So I need to merge about like 10 to 15, or I need to deal with about 15 pull requests a day to keep it like sustainable, So what I'm looking for, first of all, I'll look at, the amount of files changed in the pull request. If it's like 40 files, I start getting nervous, mainly because Laravel is just used so widely throughout the world, and it's so easy to break an edge case, because someone is using Laravel in a way we didn't expect. So I'm very cautious about any potential breaking changes. I'm pretty good at identifying where they could be in any given pull request. So typically I'll look for those. I'll see if the pull request has test. So there's two canned responses I have on GitHub. One is if the pull request doesn't have test, there's an insufficient pull request canned response where it says, hey, thanks, but this doesn't have tests, so feel free to resubmit it, when it has tests, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing I'm looking for is, do I want to take over sort of ownership of this feature forever? because maintenance ownership, I mean.
Yeah.
And that kind of plays into how many files are changing, how complicated the code is, and kind of what bang for the buck am I getting on this pull request, which is something I mentioned before. So the best pull requests are least amount of files changed, but huge user experience impact. That's like an instant merge PR, you know, whereas like a bad PR would be a lot of files changed, very minimal developer experience improvement.
Yeah.
Probably not going to get merged. So I'm looking for bang for your buck. And yeah, do I want to maintain it forever? Because, you know, there have been situations where someone is very involved in the framework. They send in a lot of PRs and then maybe they change jobs. Maybe they have an illness. Maybe something happens in their life and they're just not around anymore. Like literally they're just gone. Yeah. And now the feature is ours and we have to maintain it and know everything about it and fix bugs in it. And so do I want to take on that responsibility? Yeah. And to your second kind of point about, you know, PRs that come in several times and they get closed and then they finally get merged, which is something people get a little bit frustrated about sometimes. And I think, you know, when I say no to a PR, it's sort of no for now, because sometimes a pull request will come in and it will be a feature request and it may be the first time I've seen it and I'll think, I'm kind of on the fence, so I'll close it. But if it comes up again, or maybe 3 times or 4 times, it's like, maybe there's actually more some demand for this and some need for this more than just one person, you know? So, extreme examples of that would be like the app models directory, you know, which was like requested thousands of times before I was like, you know what? Fine. Like,
screw it.
People want it apparently. Another one recently is actually the make view artisan command, which had been pull requested maybe 7 or 8 times. And finally, once we built Folio and Volt, actually, where we felt like we were doing a lot of view-centric work, Nuno was like, Taylor, we have to do make view. Like, it's time to do make view. And once we merged it, a couple people popped up and it's like, hey, I did this 3 years ago. And it's like, I sympathize with that, but it just like, it kept coming back up. And finally it felt like, okay, the need is there at this point. So, you know, I don't know how to fully solve that problem, but that's sort of the thought process behind it, is just sort of seeing if it's a need that bubbles up again and again and sort of validates itself by repeated attempts at pull requests.
And I think there's also just kind of a concept there of like, we are, as open source maintainers, we are grateful for the PRs that come in from other folks and want to make sure that people get as much credit as possible. But in the end, we have to do what's best for the framework, which requires us to, or the tool or whatever, which requires us to do what's best for our sanity. Because if we can't take on this responsibility to maintain the thing, we're gonna be in a bad space. So what that means is prioritizing, you know, credit to where credit's due as much as possible, but at some point doing what makes the most sense for us as a maintainer. Because as the maintainer who decides what to PR and takes on the or what to merge and takes on the responsibility for maintaining it, it does have to be your decision, your vision, and your burden in the end. So all these things are at most making it easier or harder or whatever towards the maintainer's desire to provide something to the community and also to take on that responsibility to do the work to continue providing that to the community. And so, like, I would never want anybody to feel like they're not being considered, if whether it's because theirs didn't get merged and somebody else did, or theirs didn't get merged and then you wrote it or I wrote it, you know, like in our respective things that we maintain. But in the end, it is not about credit. Like, that's not the most important thing, right? The most important thing is providing a good experience for the community, which requires us to be able to work in this flow that's not always just about giving people credit, you know? So it's like, we can both say, I want you to get credit for your idea, but that's also not the most important thing. And sometimes this is just how it pans out, you know?
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. I used to ask you all the time, is there anything that somebody could PR to Laravel that you'd be, you know, grateful for them to do? And I think it got pretty early on to the point where you're like, I don't know, because if we had the idea, you know, like, we would have done it. But it still seems that there are times where you do get a PR where you're like, you know what, I could have had that idea or whatever, but I'm getting insight into how people use Laravel or would like to use Laravel based on these PRs. So it doesn't seem like you're at a point where you're like, nobody should ever PR anything, right? Like, there's still welcome contributions through PRs.
Right, because like you said, businesses are extremely varied, and they surface blind spots I would have to the framework. Where it's like, hey, this aspect of the framework actually really sucks, and here's why, because I'm doing this in the real world, and if I'm not doing that in the real world, I would never see that. So there's no way I could know to fix it. So yeah, still a lot of value there for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things that really helps for those types of PRs are PRs where someone describes a use case that is made better by this PR, that is hopefully a minimal number of lines of code, and helps share how that use case is not just something that's just them. Like some of the ones where I'm like, you did a great job of describing your use case, and I just don't think anybody else is going to have it. Whereas somebody else would describe a use case, and I would get, 35 emoji responses on the thing saying, basically effectively communicating, hey, that's my use case as well. And I can imagine how a lot of other people have that use case. That makes it much more compelling, because I'm like, yeah, that's not me. I've never used Valet that way, but wow, I get why you care about that. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is our last topic for the day. Is there anything else about how you handle PRs, or things that have been PR'd, or things that you regret merging? I assume you don't want to talk about that, but is there anything else about PRs you kind of want to share before we cut for the day?
Not really, other than if you're thinking about submitting a PR, keep in mind that whole bang for the buck thing. Try to make your PR hopefully as simple and small as possible, but a big impact on user experience. And that not just for Laravel, but I think for any open source project, I think those are the kinds of PRs they want to see and merge.
Yeah, I love that. So small code change, big impact. Preferably big impact, not just for like the most people, but also like the most benefit for each individual person. And I forget what the third one was, but yeah, you said those for sure. So sweet. Okay, anything else you want to chat about today, Taylor? Or do you feel like we got through everything that's on your mind?
No, that was fun. We covered a lot of good stuff.
I know, and only 30 minutes. Go us. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us for today, and we will see you all in 2 weeks. So, take care.
See ya.